So I'm just going to take you through real quick a little bit of overview of the recent release of Creative Cloud that we brought out in 2014. And the way that Adobe tends to think about innovating on the Creative Cloud platform is looking at the rapid pace of change in technology, right? Every day, the creative users that we come into contact with are faced with new hardware, new standards, new cameras, new formats, new technologies, and Adobe actually recently just completed a survey of 1,000 creative professionals in the United States, and the results were actually pretty amazing. 3/4 of the creatives feel like the creative industry has changed more in the past 5 years than in the last 50 years. And over 2/3 of them believe that their role will be significantly different in 3 years from now. So the pace of innovation that we see is pretty staggering, and the need for creatives to keep ahead of these changes is stronger than ever. Taking the surveys and the feedback that we get from customers into account, the 2014 release, which just was released in June, of the Creative Cloud software represents a pretty big step forward in helping creative folks like yourselves to adapt to these things we've been discussing. And so to help you keep up with the rapid pace of change, we delivered a milestone release of our desktop apps, right? So this includes all new versions of 14 CC desktop apps that are integrated amongst themselves, which you're going to see. And so today's demonstration, we're not going to focus on the mobile aspect or the services aspect of the Creative Cloud, since at Lockheed Martin, if you were on the previous call, you'll know that the Creative Cloud desktop applications are deployed in a serialized format for offline usage, so that you don't need internet connection in order to use the latest and greatest Creative Cloud desktop app technology. So let's talk a little bit more about these desktop apps, and we're going to go in and demo them and have some fun. So this release of CC is really about making the everyday creative workflow better, as well as helping you address all of these big industry shifts and challenges. So number one would be performance boosts. So enhanced Mercury performance in Photoshop, being able to upsample images 3 times faster with OpenCL performance. Also improved Mercury playback engine in Premiere Pro, the video editorial tool. A lot of performance enhancements for OpenCL and GPU debayering of red media and support for Intel Iris chips. Faster performance in Illustrator, so Windows 7 or 8 GPU acceleration is going to provide 5 to 10 times faster rendering of vectors, along with accelerated pan and zoom for complex compositions. And also, which you'll see, Adobe Muse is now deployable in an offline environment and is 64-bit native. In terms of the workflow efficiencies, there's a lot of different ones of these, the hardware and formats. You know, I don't really want to talk about each one of these bullet points too much, because I'd rather show you the stuff. And like I said before, you can go through each one of these applications, Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, Muse and Premiere, and all of the other tools that we have. And you could spend all day on each one of these tools figuring out what's new in them. So what I really want to do is show you what's new. What you'll be able to do after I'm finished is go to learn.adobe.com and just go in and choose the tool that you want to deep dive into, right? So right when you go in and you say, click on your own identity, right? I'm logged in as myself. Let's say you want to learn a little bit more about what I showed in Illustrator. So you'd click on Illustrator. You bring up this page, which would let you kind of scroll down a little bit and learn a little bit more about each of those features, right? The new pen tool and anchor point enhancements, or the rebuilt pencil tool, or SVG export and CSS export from Illustrator. And once you click on those, you can kind of roll down, and what we're doing on learn.adobe.com is providing video tutorials in depth and also sample files to practice with. So you really get kind of the best learning capabilities quickly, on demand, without any need for additional webinars or anything. But you can learn essentials, techniques, you can find out just what's new, and each of these tutorials are really great. There are also, for those who might just be getting started in something like Illustrator or Photoshop, there are actually interactive tutorial games that are all built in HTML5 that teach you about specific tools inside of the applications. Like, for example, in Illustrator, there's a tool called the Shape Builder, which lets you take two vector objects and just build them together into one vector object. And it's a pretty easy tool. Just do clicking and dragging, but these games actually help you to understand the purpose of the tools within Illustrator, how exactly to use them, what gets accomplished, and it's gamified. So, as you earn more knowledge, you actually get bragging rights and can, brag on social media. And then what we also do is maintain a comprehensive database of what the newest features are and how those stack up kind of year over year to the previous versions. So you can go through and kind of scroll down and see, these are all of the things that I'm getting that I didn't get in CS6, which is over 2 years old now. And not only do you get kind of checkboxes, but we double-click and get into descriptions of all of those tools. So if you see something you like here today, and you need justification to get funding to go ahead and get that new version, as you can see, we've got a lot of documentation for you. So that being said, let's actually jump into the tools, because that's the much more exciting part, I always find. So we're actually going to go in order like we had on the invitation. We're going to tackle Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Muse, and Premiere. But first we're going to start over here in Photoshop, which is, if I look at the polls from today, that was definitely the majority of folks claim Photoshop as the Adobe tool that they're most familiar with. And so we're going to talk about some top new features in there. And we're going to start right here in Photoshop CC 2014. And the first feature I'd like to show you is, as you can see, we're actually working on a campaign here. We've got a few different posters, right? We've got poster 1, poster 2, poster 3. And so there are some shared assets amongst these posters. We're also going to be working on a site and also just some regular old photography. But we're going to start here in this poster for this band called Wild Leaves. And I'm just going to use my zoom tool to kind of zoom in here, because when I look at this photo, there's this amp kind of sitting on the desktop, and it's got their logo, and I as a graphic artist, I'd kind of like to turn that a little bit, but I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to accomplish that. So what I can do is just right-click and come into the Layers panel, and I can see that it's a smart object, and so that smart object there, let's see, it's this amplifier, right? So I'd really kind of like to turn this a little bit so that the logo is more prominently displayed for the band, so that it'll be saved back to that poster. So there's a lot of different, I could do skewing, and I could do rotating, but I'd like to change the perspective a little bit. So what I'm going to do with that amp selected is I'm just going to come up into Edit and say Perspective Warp. And what I can do now is basically just draw a perspective cage over our amp here, and then give Photoshop a little bit of guidance about how this amp is shaped, right? How we would like to modify the perspective. So now that I've drawn that cage and I have it pretty good, I come up into my control panel, and now I can start warping. And I can warp based on just dragging, right? So if you're familiar with the Puppet Warp tool, which we've had in Photoshop for some time, or the Puppet Warp tool in After Effects, you'll see that this is pretty much the same concept. Now, if I hold down Shift on one of these vertices here, and I click, notice it'll straighten it out. So I can really, get the perspective change that I want. If I hold down Shift there, notice that that'll move out, and I can kind of move that out. Now, what you might also be noticing over here is since I am performing this operation on a smart object, when I go ahead and click OK, notice that it is applied as a smart filter, so I can turn that on and off. So this is a non-destructive perspective edit that I can add to the AMP. So if I go ahead and save that, and I come back to my composition, notice it updates automatically. All right, so that's number one. Number two would be to come over here and notice, remember, we're working on a campaign, and this campaign has a variety of different assets associated with it, one of which would be this Playfest logo. And if I look in this poster, right, you'll notice that this Playfest logo is also in the lower left-hand side. In this poster, the Playfest logo is in the lower left-hand side. So in previous versions of Photoshop, what I would have to do in order to get these uniform is I'd have to change them one by one or copy and paste them. There's no way to have a linked object between two Photoshop files. So what we did in CC 2014 was give you the capability of, right, if I double-click into this bottom bar here, if I want to go ahead and make a change to, this Playfest logo, let's see. So that Playfest logo is actually an Illustrator vector file, right? So if I come in here and just double-click, maybe I just want to change some of the colors, so I'll go into recolor artwork and edit the colors, maybe just fly it around a little bit. Okay, I like those colors. That's not too bad, right? So now I'm going to, here in Illustrator, I'll say File Save. Yep, that's fine. I'll come back to Photoshop. Notice it's automatically saved in bottom bar here. But bottom bar, I would like this bottom bar to be shared amongst all the rest of these, all the rest of these files, right? I'd like it to be in this file, which it will be, but I'd like it also to be in this file and that file. So how do I go about taking that smart object and basically turning it into a linked object? So what I can do is I can say save as, right? And so I'm going to save this in my Lockheed right here in my shared links, and I'm going to call it bottombar.psd. Notice I'm saving over bottom bar here, and I'll say save. I'll go ahead and replace that. And so now when I come back to bottom bar here, what I can do in the layers panel is I can say, let's see, because it is a smart object, I can either say replace contents or I can say convert to linked. So if I say convert to linked, I can save this file, right, out as bottom bar, or I can say replace contents, and I can replace the contents with that smart object that I just created, right? So that PSD is now a linked smart object. There we go. And now if I come back into these other posters, because they were linked to that bottom bar.psd, now they update as well, right? So this is linked smart objects in Photoshop. We've never had this capability before. And how do we know that it's linked? Well, if I look over here just real quick at bottom bar, notice that an embedded smart object kind of has a different look than a linked smart object. You've got that little link icon in the layers panel, right? So a linked icon tells us that this is a linked smart object. And so you can have entire compositions based on linked smart objects now and kind of really work with this in a much more collaborative, work with Photoshop and your layouts in a much more collaborative way. And you can also, once you have something like a composition like this with linked smart objects, you can come up and you can say place linked, place embedded, the same way that you would with InDesign or Illustrator. You can place a linked smart object, or you can just embed a smart object. Or you can come in, I like this one, this is new, and you can actually package your Photoshop file. Oh, I guess it's missing a smart object? Interesting. Let's save it, and now let's try. Right? Oh, huh. Well, I guess I must not have saved something along the line. But if I come in here and package this guy, all right, there we go. Oh, well, Anyway, what it'll do is take that PSD and package it up with all of the associated assets. Let's try this guy. Let's just package up him. All right. Well, I don't seem to be having a lot of success with it, but maybe we can just go back and keep going with our demo. But the packaging takes advantage of all of the links, and it'll create a folder with all of those linked objects in there, so you can share it, across your enterprise. So one of the things that folks are not necessarily aware of in Photoshop that we added a while back was the idea of being able to do live shapes inside of your inside of your composition. And when I say live shapes, what I mean is I'm going to grab the direct selection tool and grab that shape. Notice that we've got these Bezier handles, right? So this is a live shape. We don't want to turn it into a regular path. When I say live shape, what I mean is when I go into my properties panel, you'll notice that I've got all these live shape properties. So I can do things like, for example, change the corner radius right here automatically, or I can unclick the link and I can say 0.1 just for that corner, right? Maybe we'll make this a full 1 down here. Well, that looks pretty horrendous. So let's just say 0.5 maybe. Yeah, it's a little bit better maybe. And of course I can add a stroke, a black stroke. I can make it dashed if I want to. I can put it on the center, a straddle stroke or an outer stroke if I want to, and I can change the caps and I can change the corners of that stroke. So this is a real live vector shape right here inside of Photoshop where I can make these changes. So that's pretty cool. We've seen linked smart objects, perspective warp, live shapes. I'm going to come over here and look at this because as you can see, in this poster the typography is pretty great, but in this poster the typography is pretty, I think the technical word is crappy. So I'm going to just grab this text here, right, this text layer that says Vines, and I am going to search for some new fonts for it. So I've got fonts in here. One of the things that we added in Photoshop is when I come up to the control panel and I'm looking for fonts, when I hover over these fonts, you'll notice that right in the layout, the preview of the font updates. So that's nice because I can really, kind of scroll through, find the font that I want. I also have, if I'm looking for a sans serif font, right, I can just type in sans, and I can come in and just look at the sans, right? Or I can say, let's see, Sans Pro, and just get down to the Sans Pro fonts. So I like Source Sans Pro, bold, semi-bold. Yeah, there we go. I don't know. I'm not the best designer in the world, but I like that improved typography experience a lot. I think it makes a difference when you're trying to design and be creative. Now, I'm going to take a look at a few other elements here because we've improved our capabilities in blurring and creating special effects. So I'm just going to zoom into this spool from the 1960s. And I'm just going to right-click to grab that smart object. Now, when I double-click, right, I'll get into the, into that actual smart object, and I'm going to apply like kind of a spinny blur effect by coming up into Filter, Blur Gallery. Right, this isn't in your blur controls. This is in your blur gallery, and I'm going to add what's called a spin blur, where I can kind of change the parameters live on canvas in real time. For the effect that I'm trying to create here, right? So you see I can kind of rotate that blur, I can move it around, I can change the size, and it really does kind of impart a look of, spinning that spool around. And I've got controls of how much do I want it to look. Do I want it to look like somebody's really cranking it up or just a little bit? And I can change the blur angle here as I desire. I'll go ahead and say OK and apply that. And of course, since I applied that to a smart object, we can turn that on and off. In the Layers panel, I'll go ahead and save that and come back to our poster, and you can see that that updates. So that's one of the types of blur effects that you can add. Another type is called path blur, right? This is a new new concept where you can basically blur content along a path. So I'm going to say filter blur gallery. Instead of spin blur, I'm going to add a path blur. And so Photoshop gives me this kind of default path, but what I'm going to do is hold down the Control key and just move this over, because the thing that I want to blur here is his hand, right? So let's turn off preview for a second. I mean, this is a good image, but you know, he's playing the guitar, but we used a really high shutter speed, so we captured that. I'd really like to blur his hand a little bit, just a little bit. So I am just going to pull this down slightly, right, these on-canvas controls, and make it so that the blur has a little bit of an arc to it, right? So there we go. We've got that arc, but the rest of the picture is blurry. So how do we stabilize it? So as you can see, I can control these pins. So I'm just going to grab these pins, and if I hold down Shift and double-click, that will make that particular vertex, you know, it'll zero out the amount of blur that is associated with it. So Shift double-click. Am I getting the incorrect? Is it Control click or Shift click? Oh yeah, that's right, it's Shift click, I'm sorry. So it's just Shift, or is it Option? Wait, am I getting this wrong? Ah, there we go. Yeah, it's Command double click. Sorry about that, folks. So Command double click will allow you to zero out the blur applied to that path, right? So now this entire side of the image is free of blur. Of course, his face is still pretty blurry, so let's make another one here. And I'm going to hit Command. And again, that's Command on Mac, Control on PC. And just zero out the blur there. The drum is still a little bit blurry, so I'm going to hold down Command click here just to sharpen that up, and Command double click there to sharpen that up. So now, as you can see, we have in just a little bit of clicking around, we've added just that motion path blur, and if I hold down Command here and just kind of drag this up, we can cover his hand so it really does look like it's blurring appropriately. And now when I click OK, and I save that and come back to my original file, right, that's really a much better effect, I think. So I like those spin blur and path blur effects. Now another thing you'll notice in this image is that we've got a list of the folks who are going to be in this concert over here on the left-hand side. And I don't know if you noticed, but when we were in this poster, that list is actually nicely spaced out, right? Anybody who is a designer looks at that and says, oh yeah, that's a good uniform length that these objects have been distributed against, but whoever came in and did this one did a pretty awful job. So what we've done in Photoshop to help designers kind of deal with spacing things out, and because more and more designers are starting to use Photoshop than ever before, is when you hold down the Command key, you'll notice that we now have these really great smart guides that work a lot like the smart guides in many of our other applications do. So I'm going to grab Wild Leaves. I'm going to pull it way over here. And you'll notice that smart guide on the bottom is helping me keep it aligned. I'm not even holding down Shift because that smart guide was helping me, right? I'll grab this one and move it, and I'm not holding down Shift because those smart guides are helping keep it locked, right? So I like that. Now watch what happens as I get this Ninja Sonic object next to Mari Yamamoto there is, Photoshop says, you know what, we want a uniform distribution of these objects, right? 24 pixels is how far this one is, and it does the judgment for us. So now as I move Vimes away, it's obviously going to perform the same behavior, and now everything is evenly distributed. So now when I grab these and move them back over, right, everything is well distributed, well aligned, and that's all because of the automatic smart guides in Photoshop. So when I come back to our composition, it looks really good, right? Pretty good. Okay, we're going to skip ahead for just a second and talk about layer comps. This is something that Photoshop has had for a long time. The idea that you've got a lot of different layers and a lot of different folders, inside of your Photoshop composition, and sometimes you just want to kind of capture the position, the effects, and the visibility of certain layers when you're speccing out something like a website. So for example, we're looking at this Playfest website, and we just have this set of layer comps that show us different configurations of the layers in Photoshop as open or close, as specific effects being applied or not applied. And so as you can see, what this has in common across all of the different layer comps is this, stage 1, 4 p.m., right? So what you weren't able to do in previous versions of Photoshop is actually sync up effects across layer comps or update the appearances of, selected layer comps across, an entire document. So if I come in here and I look at the stage time box, and I turn off the color overlay, so now it's black. So now that I've done that, I can come in and say update the appearances, and when I come back down, notice that it is, well, it's black there, but what I have to do is actually come and grab all of these, and I'm going to update the appearances across all of them. So now all of them are black, right? That stage background is black. All right, so that's pretty good that we can sync up the appearances and the position and the visibility of layers in our layer comps by being able to sync effects, by being able to sync positions and also visibilities when we're working with layer comps. So if you use that feature in Photoshop, that's pretty great. Now, I just want to also mention something. This is not a brand new feature in Photoshop, but this is something that we added in a previous iteration of the Creative Cloud, which is the capability of going into any layout that has specific kind of pieces of imagery laid into it. And let's face it, that's pretty much every Photoshop document that we work with. And instead of the old way of getting your images out of your layer comps, which was a process of going through, oh God, where is it, the dreaded, hated slice tool, where you'd have to slice up your graphics and then export each one individually or with the Save for Web dialog, which, just kill me now. What we've given you the capability of doing here is generating image assets, right? So if I come into File and I choose to generate image assets, what you'll see in the Finder, and I'm just going to open up my Finder here, right? So in Photoshop, let's see. So this is going to come up right next to Site Playfest when I start giving these layers image names, right? So Vimes Hero, for example, which is that image that we have selected, if I come in and I say vimeshero.png, for example, watch what happens in the Finder. Did you notice that? It was almost too fast to see that in Vimes, in that folder where my Photoshop file lives, there's now an ancillary folder that has vimeshero.png generated at those specific dimensions that it is in the Photoshop file. And of course, we can go through and control whether that's a JPEG, a PNG, a GIF, an SVG file. We can get pretty granular. We can say that we want it as a JPEG 10, right? So I'll go through and say JPEG 10, right? In other words, 10 compression. And when I come in here to the assets, notice that now it's a JPEG and not a PNG. If I come through, and here's something that is also really awesome. Remember, we call this generator because it's live generating these image assets from our Photoshop file in real time. So if I come in to this file, I'm just going to double-click and give it like a really ugly, color, like red color overlay. Right? So now we're making it really red and ugly. Now if I come back, I didn't have to save that file, but Photoshop auto-generated me, a new JPEG that is red. So if you're working on web comps inside of Photoshop and you need to have kind of live connectivity to the assets that are getting generated, then you can do that with Generator, right? Pretty good. Another thing, I love Photoshop, so I'm going to stay in here as long as possible, but another thing that you're probably familiar with, right, this was a big splash in the world of Photoshop, in CS6 was, you've been able to do content-aware filling and content-aware scaling and content-aware, moving, right? So for those who are not familiar with content awareness, right, you grab something that you want to get rid of on the background, right, and I'm going to hit the backspace key or delete key, and I'm going to say fill it with content aware, okay, and it does a pretty good job, right? Now, we've had this in CS5, so this should not come as a surprise to anyone. The content aware move tool, which we created in CS6, allows you to basically grab whatever you have selected and move it, and Photoshop will both fill in the background and move the character or move whatever it is. But one of the things that you might notice is actually I left this from the last demo, so it's not where I didn't give you the proper before and after. Let me take a step back here, right? So the new feature that we have in Photoshop CC is the ability to adapt to different color backgrounds. So, right, the old way was to move this, and notice I'm getting the color from her background. And so when I move it, you'll notice, right, the background is filled in nicely, but the background coming from the previous placement is bleeding through, right? We're getting that bad color bleed. So what we want to do here is instead of just moving it, we can come into our adaptation characteristics and adapt for color. So now I'm going to drag this, and you'll notice that not only do we move the character, but the background color that fills in is a little bit more adaptive. And we can come in and kind of dial that up and down. So I'm just going to hit the up key, and you'll see in real time how Photoshop is kind of trying to adapt the background color to fit, right? So again, that was something that we wanted to increase adoption of this content-aware movement, because it is, I use it all the time in my own photos, but that background color was a big problem. So last but not least, and you're probably familiar if you've been working with Photoshop for any time, of the need in a design or in a photography workflow to basically select elements off of a background in order to do compositing. So in this example, we've got some text, and we'd like the character to appear over that text, and what we're going to have to do is select him off of the background. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go about doing this, right? You can go to the quick selection tool and kind of drag over, but there's an even faster way in an image that would work like this. And as you'll notice, this was taken with a pretty shallow depth of field. In other words, he's in focus in the foreground, but the background is pretty blurry. So the focus area is pretty narrow. And so what we want to do for this image is come up and say select focus area, right? So now, instead of just dragging around the content that I want to select, we tell Photoshop, look at what's in focus and select that. And I can kind of dial that up a little bit, so I can say, well, what is in focus? What is actually in focus here? And of course, I've got tools where I can kind of tell Photoshop a little bit more about what's in focus and what isn't. Right? We've got a little bit of spotting here. We can decrease the image noise a little bit. Now, of course, it's not perfect, especially around the hair. So what I might want to do is, once I've done that quick job, I'd come into Refine Edge and turn on Smart Radius and start painting over those edges a little bit that need a little bit more refining, like, for example, the beard, right? I'd want to decontaminate the background colors so that I can get some good opacity, with the selection in the hair, right? So now you can see, using the, refine edge dialog along with the focus mask selection. So again, it's just another way of doing a quick selection, especially when you're working with a particular kind of image. So now that I've done that, right, we've gotten a pretty good quality selection, right? You can see the letters through the details in the beard and in the hair, and it really came along nicely. So again, when I save that and come back to the original comp, it looks really great. Okay. Wow, so that was a whirlwind tour of Photoshop. And let me pause right now to see if there are any questions in the chat pod. Christine asks, what is the difference between linked and embedded smart objects, right? A great question, Christine. So the difference is an embedded smart object will travel around with the Photoshop file. A linked smart object lives outside of the Photoshop file. So, if I'll show you in Bridge, right? So in Bridge, right, I've got this folder of shared links, right? So one of the ones that I worked with was bottom bar, right? And so bottom bar is placed, that is a placed PSD file inside of 1, 2, 3. So it's a shared smart object, whereas if I've got what is it called, an embedded smart object in here. Like, for example, this is another little nice thing that most Photoshop users don't know about, is that in the Layers panel, if I just want to search inside of my composition for smart objects, I can search for linked smart objects, I can look for embedded smart objects. So this embedded smart object here, right, it has a different character, but I can't use this, let's see, what is that? So that's the type treatment, right? I can't use this across all those other files as a linked resource that will update all the other files when it's updated, right? So when I make a change to this type treatment, it's only going to impact this PSD file because it's not a shared asset. So hopefully that helps to answer your question there. But we got to keep going because we don't have a lot of time, and we got a lot to show in the next little while here. So I'm going to move it on along to Illustrator, which a lot of us are also using. So Illustrator is, for CC 2014, there's a lot of great stuff happening with it. I think the thing that most folks aren't aware of that we added even before the June release was this capability of having live corners on our vector objects, right? So I'm actually going to undo everything here. I'm going to grab that and delete it. So a live corner is basically what you see here. I'll zoom in to give it a little bit more effect. A live corner is now for any vector object allows you to, yes, work with, kind of this live shape capability that we showed you in Photoshop, which, should have been in Illustrator the whole time, but has not been. And of course, when you go into the transform panel, you can change that on a granular fashion as well. You can unlink it and just work with one of them. And now when you actually go into Illustrator and you just draw a shape, it is automatically, right, so I'll collapse the transform panel. I'll just draw a rectangle here, and you'll notice that automatically the transform panel kicks open and gives you those controls to dial in or dial out your live shape, right? So that's new. I think this is really useful for people who are designing interfaces, right, or doing UI, UX prototyping in Illustrator, because that is a feature that actually came over from Fireworks, right? So that's a kind of nice UI, UX. And the thing I like about this even more is that you can select, not just one, but right, let's grab that whole set of them, and when I come into transform, and I say, let's say 0.5 for those corners, right? You can make those transformations across a wide variety of objects that you select. So that is pretty great, but probably one of the more fundamental changes that has been made to Illustrator goes with the basic, like what you use Illustrator for, which is drawing. And so back in the day, we made this pencil tool, right? So if anybody here on this call has been using Illustrator for a while, they pretty much ignore that icon, right? And that icon means basically nothing to them because they use the pen tool, right? Or the line tool, or one of the other vector creation tools, right? We like those, we know those, and they work for making smooth curves. And when you grab something like the pencil tool and you try and draw a smooth curve, oh, hold on, I got to get to the hair. Let's see, because I'm in the wrong place for the seating chart. Where is, hold on a sec. Oh, you know what? I think I'm drawing it. I'm just not drawing it. Let's see. No? Oh, dear. is one of those things where you queue it up right before the demo, and then, you know what, I'm just going to unlock everything. All right, there we go. And okay, so now that I've got my pencil tool, I'm going to make sure that I'm using just a single white stroke. And I'm just going to draw. And of course, what does it look like? I think the technical word is crud, because let's look at the quality, right? Look at all those different points that we made, and it's very wobbly, and it looks like it was drawn with a mouse, which it was. But what we've done with the pencil tool is actually make it a little bit more friendly for those who are trying to make beautiful strokes, right? So we've actually allowed you to take the fidelity from accurate, which is bad, to smooth, which is good. So let's go ahead and say, right, so I'm just going to draw that same line. And notice how many points did we make there? 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of 20, right? And look at the quality of that stroke. Of course, we can go in and make it a little bit bigger if we want to, change the dimensions of that stroke, and of course come in with the width tool, which we've had since the CS5 time frame, and really make that stroke nice. But it started with the pencil tool, which is hard. That's kind of hard for a lot of folks to believe when they see it. Another thing that we've added is down by the pen tool, we've actually added some new capabilities in the anchor point tool. And this is the anchor point tool that I'm looking for the exact name of the feature. It's called the Path Reshape tool, right? So what does that mean? It means that you can approach any segment of a path and now kind of push it to move as you like, right? You don't have to use the Bezier handles if you don't want to. Just grabbing that section of the path and kind of moving it around, however you like, right? So I like that, because to make quick adjustments where I don't necessarily want to tweak out the Bezier handle, that can be, kind of a nice way to adjust things. But, for those who use the pen and are ardent lovers of the pen tool, we've actually added something which I think is going to make it more approachable for those who are not necessarily used to it, right? So drawing with the pen tool now gives you, right, and I'm just going to click here and drag a little bit to start my curve. It now gives you a preview, right? Can you see that preview of what my line is going to look like before I actually draw it? How about that, right? Pretty nice. Never had an actual live preview of the destination of the pen tool before. And so it gives those who are drawing with the pen tool a little bit more kind of foreknowledge of what they're going to be getting into, right? I'm going to hit escape. So pretty nice, right? New improvements with the drawing tools and with the pen tool, and also with the Path Reshape tool that I really like. Now, when you're designing something like a ticket or like a website or anything like that in Illustrator, which we're finding more and more people doing, one of the things that the great designer-developer divide separates all of us. And we sometimes just want somebody who's working in HTML who already has HTML for this site pretty much nailed down, but they're not exactly sure what the CSS is going to be to re-represent the design exactly as the designer intended. So how would we go about doing that? And so if I go into my typography layout here, you'll notice that this particular composition has a bunch of character styles, it has some object styles, it has some paragraph styles associated. So some of these have character styles, some of them have paragraph styles. But it's all basically going to boil down to the same thing, which is CSS. So if I just grab the content that I want off of this layout here, and I come up to my web workspace, I've got a CSS Properties panel here. And so those CSS Properties are based in the character and object and paragraph styles that I set up in my document, and they are associated with the design here. So we've already generated those CSS Properties, and what I'm going to want to do is come in and say, hold on a second, I didn't grab the right stuff here. There we go. Yep. So as you can see, I can generate the CSS button. I can click the Generate CSS button to generate the CSS. So that button is let's see, where is it? Down there, right? So I can generate that CSS. And I can copy and paste all this CSS into the source code for that web page, which I actually have open here in Edge Code, right? I could put it in the style header, which is not the most efficient way. The better way in HTML is to actually use an external style sheet, so playfestweb.css. So what I can do is, instead of doing all that copying and pasting, I can say, I can come in and say export all. I can do that as playfestweb.css in the appropriate directory. All right, click OK. All right, and it's going to generate those images, and when I come back to my file and I refresh, notice that that CSS style sheet has been applied, and it looks pretty good compared to what we had designed in Illustrator. So we exported that CSS, but we can also, of course, if I want to, get rid of that style sheet and go in and just paste it all directly in the code, I could do that as well. So pretty good, pretty fast way of getting CSS out of your site. And speaking of getting CSS out of your site, we've got another site that we're working on here, which I'm going to go back to Chrome. Right, so you can see this website here. This was also created with exporting CSS from Illustrator, but as you can see, this SVG file, or Scalable Vector Graphics file, doesn't scale along with the rest of the page because it hasn't been exported as a responsive SVG so that it can be modified by the CSS on the page to scale along with the rest of the page. Right, so we can actually now fix that in Illustrator by coming over to, look at this vector object, and we can just say Save As. And so we can save this as an SVG file, and when we do, right, I'm just going to save that as underscore responsive. We're just going to replace the old one, and now we are going to make sure that we have responsive clicked, right? That's going to make it resizable by the CSS and the web pages. So I'll go ahead, say OK. I'll come back to my code editor and my page here, and now I'm going to just put, instead of I'm going to put the responsive, I've spelled that wrong, responsive, there we go, and I'm going to save that, and I'm going to refresh, and now you can see that SVG fits inside of the width of the browser. Notice it's scaling, so that really is a responsive, scalable vector graphics, right? It's not going to, the quality is not going to degrade the larger or smaller it gets. So that is pretty great. Let's see, we still have a little bit more time to spend on Illustrator, so I'll show you one more thing, which is this capability that we've had in Illustrator for a while to create perspective view. And so if you're familiar with this capability inside of Illustrator, right, you can basically look at your perspective view in only one perspective. But until now, you haven't had the capability of, when you move the perspective grid around, to actually move the art around. And so with this, this is actually probably better demonstrated just by creating a new file and starting from scratch, right? So let's just take a look really quick at what we're talking about here with perspective grids, right? We're going to make a 2-point perspective grid. We're going to grab the rectangle tool, and we're going to draw something in. Well, that's not the right perspective. I want it to draw on the right pane there, right? So now we've drawn that in perspective. We can put a red fill in it, and we can do whatever, right? We can come over to our perspective selection tool, move it up and down inside of the perspective, and I can hold down Alt and hold down Shift and move that, and then hit Command D and just make windows down the side of the building as much as I want. So one of the things that you've never been able to do with these perspective tools is, if I wanted to move the perspective, to move the art along with the perspective grid. But now if I go into View Perspective Grid Lock Station Point, what that's going to do is allow me to move the art along with the grid, right? So in this example right here, if I zoom out enough, right, the handle is way the heck out here, right? So now I can, well, nope, it didn't work because I didn't lock the perspective point. Oh, no, it is locked. So there we go. So you can see there's actually a lot more detail that we're missing in this art. And so you can draw in the art at a variety of different perspectives. So pretty nice new kind of enhancement to the perspective view in Illustrator. So that's Illustrator. Let me see really quick if we have Illustrator-based questions. Christine says, is there a search tool on layers in Illustrator? No, that would be awesome. Yeah, so great question. You win a prize for best feature request so far. And but yeah, no, not anything like that so far in Illustrator. But hopefully we will ship it soon. Ship something like that soon. No promises. So now let's go over to InDesign, because I saw there were a bunch of folks who worked on InDesign in our room. So InDesign page layout program, as you're familiar with, very powerful. So a couple of new things in InDesign without taking too much time. If you work on tables, I know I work on a lot of different kinds of tables. One of the things that a long-time feature request was just the capability of grabbing a column and just being able to drag and drop it from one place to another. This is, you'd be surprised how many layout artists I show this to, and they're like, thank God, because it's really kind of an overdue feature for InDesign tables. So yay, we did it, and it looks really great. Another feature inside of InDesign, if you look in your swatches, is you can now make swatch groups, right? So you can take a bunch of colors that you create, right? Create a new swatch, call it, you know, call it a spot color, call it LMCO, make it whatever color you want, right? So now I've got LMCO. Yay. Let's take those three and put them in a, oh, I guess I can't do black or paper or registration, but I can do black and white, right? So let's call this the LMCO group, right? So now you actually have the, an ability to organize your swatches panel. So that's one of those, just do it, Adobe, why have you been keeping me waiting so long for this? So you've been, in the past, you've been able to take compositions from different applications, like, for example, Adobe Edge Animate, which allows you to create HTML-based animations, and you can place them directly in InDesign for export to Adobe's Digital Publishing Suite, right? So when I look, if I go into Digital Publishing Workspace in InDesign, you'll see when I look at my links panel here that this object is an Edge package, right? It's an OAM animation. And so if I wanted to preview what that was going to look like in the Digital Publishing Suite, I would open up my folio overlays and I would plug in my iPad and I would look at that, you know, for the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite, which is an online service. However, if you wanted to have that and you wanted to do things like embed audio and video, right, which this is right here. This is an embedded video file. I've got an embedded audio file over here, right? You can see that it's you know, pretty dynamic page. We've also got hyperlinks to social media, right? So if I look in my, where is my hyperlinks panel? No. Oh, there it is. Right, hyperlinks. So you can see, you know, each one of these is its own hyperlink for Vimes Music, right? This one is for SoundCloud. This one is for Twitter, right? So you can make these kind of dynamic compositions, but putting this out in a PDF, the video wouldn't be visible on a mobile device, the animation wouldn't be visible on a mobile device, and sometimes even the video and audio wouldn't play back in a mobile device. So what we've done in CC is give you the capability of exporting your Epub, exporting your composition to what's called a fixed layout Epub, right? So fixed layout Epub is different from a reflowable Epub because a reflowable Epub is like what you would get from the Amazon, you know, for the Amazon Fire, Kindle Fire, or the Barnes & Noble Nook, right? It's you can scale the text up and down, and it basically reflows to the dimensions of the container, which is the device size, right? But a fixed layout Epub is going to maintain the layout of the object. So let's maintain the layout of your document. And when I say save, notice that we get a whole bunch of you know, options here. how to convert our images, if we want to put in any additional CSS or JavaScript, if we want to add any metadata, and how we want to view it afterwards, right? So we're going to view this in the iBooks app, which is on my desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. It's going to export that EPUB, this fixed layout EPUB, right? So, and then it's going to show it to me directly inside of my e-reader application, which is on my desktop here, right? So we didn't put in a nice cover page, which we could have done there. But as you can see, right, this is different than your ordinary experience in that, wow, I've got a clickable interactive HTML5 animation set that was dropped in to my ebook. Now, this is not going to work on a PDF, right? If you take a PDF and put that on a tablet or a mobile device, it's not going to work. But here, this nice video that we dropped in, right, we can full screen that video if we want, and of course that's going to work on a tablet or mobile device as well. The audio, same thing. You know, these links are all live and will take us out to the social media sites. And so, you know, as you can see, this ebook, which is fixed layout, right, it's not reflowable, is going to provide a much richer experience for tablets and mobile devices than you would get from a PDF that you came out of InDesign from. So this is actually a really big deal if you're creating content for a classified network, right? So if you're making content that needs to be distributed, kind of sneaker netted to mobile devices, but it needs that rich interactive functionality, the fixed layout EPUB is going to be a big differentiator. And in the October timeframe at Adobe Max, we're making a whole bunch of new announcements for how we are going to continue supporting fixed layout EPUBs and the rich interactivity, including the capability of creating animations directly inside of InDesign and having those be surfaced in an EPUB. So there's some really exciting announcements coming up for what we can do with EPUB in InDesign. So that being said, I don't want to take too much time with InDesign because we're quickly coming. I mean, we still have about half an hour left, but I wanted to get to Adobe Muse and I wanted to get to Adobe Premiere Pro. So without further ado, right, Adobe InDesign, obviously a great design application for those who are you know, doing page-based layouts. Whoops, that's the wrong thing. Doing page-based layout and design, but you know, for those who are trying to get to the web, it's usually kind of tricky or sticky or difficult, right? We don't have an understanding. Whoops, I meant to be on Muse there. We don't always have an understanding of how the web is you know, supposed to work. So let me see. I am going to just mute everyone for a second so that we can get rid of the background noise. All right, thanks. And sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure that that everybody, we weren't getting that background noise. So, so if you're a designer and you're used to designing for pages, and you need to start learning how to design for the web, that's what Adobe Muse is for, right? It's a kind of a non-threatening way to start designing. It's got a lot of the same conventions that you have in InDesign, being able to place Photoshop files or Illustrator files and scale them, basically to lay out pages and fills and strokes and colors and typography the same way that you would lay out an InDesign page, the same types of guides, the same types of styles, right? You've got character and paragraph styles. And you also have the advantage of being able to create a sitemap, right? So a pretty nice little sitemap that can work for the desktop experience of your website, but you can also create a phone-based experience of your website. So, you know, here on the desktop, obviously we've got our home page, and but that's, if we try and look at this on a phone, it's not going to look kind of the way that we want the experience to look. So we can design that home page or share assets between the home page for desktop and the home page for phone, because as you can see, it's a bit of a different experience, right? It's a little bit more vertical, it's not so horizontal, and it's the images are a little bit bigger and more pronounced in order to be seen on a kind of a smaller handheld device. Now, that being said, sometimes we want to share assets. We want to grab content and place it from the desktop version where we started to the phone version, that we are kind of targeting. But sometimes that content doesn't always make it over, as you can see. And so in the Muse 2014 release, like I said before, first of all, it's a 64-bit native application, right? And so it's no longer an Air application that needs to be online in order to use it. And that was a big problem if you were working in the enterprise and you were trying to use Adobe Muse. It would always ask you to sign in with an Adobe ID, and if you didn't do that, it wouldn't let you run the program. But now, as you can see, Muse is actually, in the 2014 release, it's no longer an Air application, so that's great. And it's also 64-bit native, so it performs really quickly. And you can deploy it like Lockheed Martin is doing with a serial number. And so that is really great. And one of the things that you might notice, if I were to go into my applications here, I'm just going to go in and take a look at the old version of Muse here, which is from last year. So let's see. I'm just going to open it up. You'll notice, right, first of all, it's got that splash screen. No, I don't want to install any updates. It's not really getting updated anyway. So one of the things that you'll notice is that, first of all, it's this white kind of obnoxious background. And also, yes, it is built on the Adobe Air runtime, right? So you have to keep the Air runtime updated as well as Muse CC. And there's no real way in here, if I come into Preferences, to change the experience of Muse. It's just always going to be white. Well, I'm a designer, and I don't really like white. I kind of like this look and feel. And actually, you know what? I'm going to open that back up to keep comparing because there's a lot of really good interface improvements here. So let's do that one more time. So, right, the interface is dark, but of course I can change that now. I can go from dark to really dark to kind of gray to light as I'm designing, right? So I'm going to keep it really dark, which is nice. Right, this older version of Muse, you'll notice if I were to, I'm just going to open up well, you know what, I'll just make a new site just for argument's sake. Right, here's my page, here's my master page. I'm going to just open up that page. Now you'll notice the experience of my panels, right? I've got my panels over here, which wait. Okay, so I can expand them in that direction, but I can't expand them in that direction. Can I tear off this scroll effect? No, I can't tear them off. I can basically just collapse them down here. Now can I dock this over on the side? Nope, it just goes onto my second screen. Can I dock it over here? Nope. All right, so kind of right, I can't customize the interface. I can't really customize the panels. I can't tear them off. So that's pretty lousy experience for me as a designer. Whereas now we've fully come into the experience of all of the other Adobe family tools, right? If I want to tear off text, I can tear that off and have that hovering and floating. I can re-dock it back here. I can pull off my entire Tools panel if I want to and put that on a different screen. And then if I want to go ahead and re-dock it, right, I can just bring it over here and hover it. And whoops, that didn't work. There we go. No, come on. No, I guess not. All right, well, I'm just going to grab it here and re-dock it. It's being obstinate with me. There we go. So, right, we get a lot of customization options with the user interface. And not only that, we get the capability of being able to view this desktop layout and this phone layout side by side, which you couldn't really do in the previous version of Muse. There's no way to be able to see if I have a second page, right? And you make second pages in Muse just by clicking that little icon there, right? So if I've got two pages here, there's no way for me to visualize. There's no controls up in View to show those to me side by side, right? To be able to do a copy paste. So now what I can do is say View. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Window Arrange Tile, right? So now I can tile those and I can dock pages with other pages, right? And so now I can just kind of zoom out a little bit, and I can come over here and zoom out a little bit and move that over so that I can zoom in and see where my problems are, right? I'm missing content. So I can just grab that content that's missing and do a quick copy-paste and see exactly where it's going to go. Of course, I've got those smart guides, right? So pretty nice, right? And now if I want to unarrange that, I can just say, I can either say reset panels, or I can say consolidate all by site. So there we go, right? Pretty nice, pretty good. Now, one of the things that folks have been asking for in Muse, for those who are a little bit more experienced, is this idea of the 100% width slideshow, right? And so what I mean by that, as you can see, we've got this slideshow here of this artist, Mari. And so I'm basically just going to go in and preview this page in the browser and show you what 100% width slideshow means in the world of the web. So, right, we've got this slideshow that continues to cover the length of the browser no matter how big or small the browser gets. And you notice that the content continues to shift, but it's aligned to the left and aligned to the right at 100% width of the page, right? And so we haven't had before the capability of creating a 100% width page. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new page. We'll call it LMCO. Right, and notice this is using that master page that we had set up there. And so now if I come on in to my widgets library and I go down in slideshows, I'm just going to grab a blank slideshow here. For those who have never used Muse before, right, you get a whole lot of options whenever you use one of these widgets. And so I'm going to turn off the autoplay. Nah, you know what, I'll leave it on. I'm definitely going to make sure that swipe is enabled, right? So if this is being seen on a touch-enabled device, being able to swipe through the slideshow is possible. But I'm going to turn off the captions, and I'm going to turn off the counter, and I'm going to turn off the previous and next buttons, because all I really want is this slideshow in the layout. And now inside of the image, I want to fill the frame proportionately, right? I don't want to fit content proportionally because I want it to have that 100% width look. And now here's where I just go ahead and add the images that I want to put in there. So let's grab those assets, right? I think they're down here somewhere. Not Jesse. Yeah, there we go. Mary. So I'm just going to grab 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 images, drop those in. And so now that I've dropped them in, and I'm going to hide this for a second, right, I've got the capability of stretching them out. And since they are set to fit the frame proportionally, notice that they're getting bigger. And now watch this little red line that I hit when I get to the edge. That means that we are locked at 100% width. So I'm just going to zoom out slightly and move that into position. And that's really all we had to do to create that 100% width slideshow. And so I'm going to, preview the page in the browser, and that's just going to show me that exact same effect. I wasn't signed in to begin with. Right, so there we go. That's how easy it can be to create a 100% width slideshow. You might have also noticed that there is this back to top button. So as I slide down, right, and I click, it'll give me that nice kind of pan back up to the top. So Muse also has that capability as well, right? If we go back to Maria Yamamoto and we look at that back to top button, what you're going to notice is that's really just a link to the master top anchor, right? So the master top anchor of that page. Now, what I could basically do is just grab that whole group and copy it, and now come over to the page that we're working on and paste it, right? So there we go. Now it doesn't have the copy, but that's all right. And so what I can do now, as you can see up here, it's looking at that master top anchor on our LMCO page. What I can do is say, hey, let's put that, well, actually, you know what? We can put that here, and then we can take our anchor, and we're going to load an anchor down here, and we're going to say, when you click on that, go down to this part of the page, right, where that anchor is, and we'll call that social, right, because we're going to drop some social widgets in there in just a minute. So now we can come back into our widget, and we've got a whole bunch of different social media widgets that we have, right? Facebook comments, that's a new one. So this site that you're hosting, if you want to leave a space for Facebook, for people to comment from using their Facebook profile, right? So if they're logged in via Facebook, they can actually leave a comment on your page that will reflect on your page and also on Facebook itself. And of course, you can control all the different parameters of that, which is pretty cool. When you're working on video, right, if you want to grab a YouTube video, you can drag that right in, right, and you can just give Muse the video ID from YouTube and, change the skin, change the, all the different controls, right? You've got a lot of kind of granular control over how the YouTube experience looks. So now when I go ahead and preview this page in the browser, right, Shift-Command or Shift-Control-E, what you're going to see is, there we go, right, there's our stuff, and I can add as a comment, right, I'd be posting as me. It notices that I'm logged in. But when I click, that's funny, it's not, maybe it has to be a place way down the page that isn't exposed, but it should theoretically be taking me. And yes, from TNAST, can you generate different grid and margin guidelines? Yes, you can. We don't have time to get deeply into that right now because we have to keep moving with Muse. And one of the things I wanted to show you as we kept going is you can really do a lot of amazing stuff with Muse. If I just preview this page here, this page, when you scroll it down, right, just this home page, you've got these really cool scroll effects. Watch, I'm going to scroll, and watch what happens to those buildings. Notice that they start slipping by. We've got this, this is all HTML, folks. That banner that just flew by, that is HTML5 created in Adobe Edge Animate, again, which is our animation tool, kind of like Flash Professional, except it exports HTML5 natively, and it lets you work with HTML5. But these scroll effects, right, when I scroll down, it's subtle, but people notice this when you have an experience of a website. And so adding those scroll effects, this is actually not particularly new inside of Muse, but notice that when I grab that building, which, let's see, what does it do? I guess it moves down, right? So if I come in here and I look at my scroll effects panel, you can see that we've set up that there's going to be motion of this item in relation to the vertical scrolling, right, in a web browser. So the initial movement is going to move up as the page is scrolled down, right? And is it going to move to the right or the left? And then what is the key position and the final motion going to be, right? Notice the final motion is going to be down, right? So what happens is it initially moves up, right? See, it moves up and then it moves down. So you set an initial motion and then a final motion, which is really just very nice and subtle. And then, of course, we've got this rectangle here, which presents that mask, right, which is a really nice kind of opacity mask that kind of hides it and prevents that edge from being so stark, right? So this is not new in Adobe Muse CC 2014. It's something that has been there, but I've seen some really, really creative effects with that. So there's a lot more in Muse, but I don't want to give Premiere the short shrift because I know that there are video folks in the room. And yes, from Lou, is Edge Reflow part of the, well, it's not called Master Collection technically anymore. It's really the Creative Cloud Enterprise. And the complete collection of Creative Cloud Enterprise, yes, does contain Edge Reflow, which we're not going to, unfortunately, have time to cover today. But that is another great tool in your arsenal for quickly comping out responsibly designed websites. And I definitely encourage you on the learn.adobe.com to go in and check out some of the cool tutorials there. That's a great tool as well. We just didn't have time to cover it today. Now, so I'm in Premiere Pro, right, CC 2014. And a lot of times what you'll find is Premiere Pro users also happen to use Adobe After Effects, right? I saw that there were some After Effects users. And in After Effects, you can do some pretty sophisticated effects that you can't really get done in Premiere. Like, for example, that lower third with her name, Mari Yamamoto, right? I mean, there's some pretty good text effects in there that you wouldn't necessarily get in Premiere. And so what a lot of editors do is they will bring in a native After Effects project, right, an AEP, and it works via dynamic link. So when a change is made to the After Effects file, it updates in Premiere, and you can actually right-click and say Edit Original right here, or you can take a clip and turn that into an After Effects composition so that it'll be dynamically linked. And so dynamic linking is really great, but what a lot of editors said that they wanted to do for stuff like lower thirds and other text treatments in After Effects. They don't want to have After Effects open to change small aspects of their After Effects content, like, for example, text, right? Let's say that we found that Mari Yamamoto is now living in New York and not in Tokyo anymore. Even though she's from Tokyo, she's now living in New York. So I don't want to have to, right-click, say, Edit an Original, open After Effects, make the change, save it, close it, come back and see the change. I just want to change it right here in Premiere. So now we can do that. If I press the F key while having that clip selected, that's going to open up the After Effects comp in my source panel right here, and it also opens up the effects control panel and shows me that these text objects in the original After Effects composition were actually made editable, right? This is After Effects editable text. So now I can come back in and say New York, New York, and as you see in the composition, it actually changes and is updated. So let's just look at our program, right? So now editors can come in and make quick changes to the content, the unlocked content in After Effects without having to, basically reinvent the wheel. Another thing that editors need the capability of doing a lot of times is if they find out, well, we're filming this particular thing, but we don't have the rights to show this guy over on the right-hand side who's dancing around, and oh, well, crap, we have to use this footage, right? This is the only footage we have. What can we do to get rid of him? Well, we can keyframe a blur mask over his face, but that's, somebody's going to have to keyframe that, and I don't know, this is like a minute long. That's like 60 or 70 keyframes, and he's moving, so it's going to be a pain. So what we added in Premiere Pro CC 2014 for editors is a capability, right? Let's say we're going to do a Gaussian blur, right? So I can search in here for the effects. So hey, Christine, you can search for effects in Premiere, so at least that. So I'm going to grab this Gaussian blur, pull it over there as an effect on there. And so you'll notice that we've got two new controls in the effects control here, right? I can create an ellipse mask, and I can pull that ellipse mask over, and I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller, right, so that it suits his face. Of course, I can rotate it, right, because we just want to track these pixels. And now, instead of having to keyframe, what we're going to do over here in the effects panel, oh, and by the way, let me see, I'm just going to make that blurry, right, so now we're blurring out his face. I'm going to expand that mask a little bit so it's a little bit bigger. We don't need to feather it. Yeah, let's go ahead and feather a little bit. All right, so now our mask is looking good. So what we can do is track that mask forward. So I'm going to hit the play button, and now Premiere is tracking those pixels forward. And so I guess it left it in the dust. Let's go back and undo that a little bit and get a little bit better of a mask on there, right? Because you have to be careful when you're doing this that you actually get the correct pixels that you want to track forward. Let's do that one more time. Alrighty. There we go. Right? We're getting his face. Alright, so let's track that mask forward and see how good of a job it does now that we've selected the right stuff. Right, does a pretty good job. And let's now get that blur going, get that mask expansion going, and let's take that forward again. Oh, no, I guess we have to track it forward again. That's right. Well, anyway, yeah, there we go. All right, so now we are tracking this guy forward. And again, that's going to take a fraction of the time tracking him using this mask tracker in Premiere than it would have if we had to keyframe out that mask individually. All right, so let's see. What is the kind of last little bit? All right, so here's something that folks have been asking for in Premiere for a while, which is, let me see, I'm going to find my composition here. So when you go into the Premiere timeline and you apply effects to a clip like this, right, so it'll just get applied to that clip. But, the source clip, which is that clip, right, that's obviously much longer, and we've taken bits out of this clip all along. Every clip in this timeline that comes from that source is orange, but traditionally you could only apply an effect to one clip in the project panel, or in the timeline rather, and then you'd have to repeat the application of that to all the other clips. You'd basically have to go and find all the other instances of orange in your timeline, and not be able to just apply it globally. So now we have this capability in Premiere called Master Clip Effects, where if I just look at the source here, and let's say, right, I'll go into my effects and I'll just do brightness and contrast, and I'm going to drag that directly onto the source monitor. Maybe bring up the brightness, right? Maybe bring up the contrast. Well, let's bring the contrast way down, right, because we want it to be stark. All right, so now when we go through our timeline and we actually play, you'll notice that that effect goes across all the different clips in orange, right? So this is a real productivity enhancement for editors who are working with a lot of different pieces of footage scattered across a long timeline, and they want to apply that effect globally across their clips, right? One more thing that we have, which I think is really cool, is the capability to, if you are shooting, and this is something that we're starting to see more and more, right? This footage is from a DJI Phantom quadcopter. As you can see, there's a little rotor of the quadcopter there with a GoPro camera, but kind of mounted on it. But as you see from this footage, it's a little bit distorted, right? And we also get some of the blades of the quadcopter in there. We get the kind of spinning rotor, and also we get lens distortion, right? And so we need to correct for that fisheye lens distortion that we get from that camera. So what we've done in Premiere is actually build in a bunch of lens distortion presets, right? So if I go into presets and we want to remove lens distortion from the DJI Phantom 2 Vision camera or from GoPro, right? We've got a lot of different models here. This one was shot using the 1080 medium setting in the in the GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black camera. And so you'll notice automatically, right, I'm going to make sure I'm viewing this at 1/4 effect. So now that distortion has been removed, and we're also clipping it so that we don't see the rotor coming through as well. So the footage is a lot less distorted, and we're not seeing the effects. Oh, well, I guess there's no avoiding just that one little one there. But all right. So that has been a whirlwind of activity. Those are really my 4 favorite features in Premiere. But again, what we covered was Photoshop, right? Smart objects, layer comps, blur gallery, focus mask, content-aware technology. We talked about live shapes and pen tool, anchor points, CSS extract, and better font experience, dragging and dropping columns, Epub fixed layout, color swatch folders, and better effects. We talked about native 64-bit and add-ons, right? Those new social add-ons and high DPI support. We actually didn't address high DPI, but that's also there. Live text templates, masking and tracking, master clip, better graphics performance, which we didn't really get into. I've got a bunch of red, 4K footage and some 5 and 6K cinema DNG footage, but we're just out of time for that. But as I mentioned before, there's a whole lot of other improvements across the board, and when you go to learn.adobe.com, you can learn about all of those. But one of the things I wanted to mention as well in kind of these closing moments as I go through and answer any more questions in the chat pod is that with Lockheed Martin's enterprise contract with Adobe, you as end users of the software have access to a number of different avenues to escalate support tickets and also to gain custom training for yourself. So, customer service and is not really, that's going to be access issues, and that's really more for IT to deal with, right? The folks who are setting up your internal portals where you're going to get the software. But if you come across install issues, you need up and running help, or if you're getting error messages inside of your product, right? Some obtuse error message, and you need the Lockheed Martin help desk is great, but they might not necessarily know what that message means or how to mitigate it. You yourself, as a Lockheed Martin employee, can reach out to techcare@adobe.com, or you can call this number here, the 866 number, and talk to somebody at Adobe in real time. And this is part of the support contract that you have as part of an enterprise Creative Cloud customer. Also, this is something that you might not be aware of, is that you're entitled to expert services. And this is even more in-depth than I was able to go with those top features today. In-depth product-related demos with complicated workflows that you might be working on, a lot of how-to training or solution optimization. You have an unlimited supply of expert services calls, right? All you have to do is email this address to schedule a time and date, and you set up a web and phone conference just like the one that we're having right now, and you'll be all set to go. So that's really exciting for you inside of Lockheed. And with that, I am just going to go ahead and stop screen sharing because we are right at noon.